Hey, this is Austin Bach back once again with another standard deck to show off to you guys. This time we're on the regular Magic client, not the beta, but we are working with a Temur control deck, and this is after the Pro Tour, so we've already seen decks like Shota Yasuoka's Grixis Control, which won the whole thing, Carlos Romau's Jeskai Control, which took second place, all based around basically the blue-red shell of Torrential Gearhulk, counter spells, harness lightnings, card draw, that kind of thing. So that basic shell is intact, but today instead of pairing it with either black or white for more controlling options, we're trying out a green splash. And it might seem like we're just being kind of contrarian and trying something different just to be for the sake of being different, but I think green actually has some legs in the format, and I'm going to go over kind of why. The big reason that I built the deck today is because of Tireless Tracker, which very similarly to Painful Truths, it comes down, it gets you value. It's at the very least a 2-for-1 if you can play a land right away, and if it sticks around, it just gets you incidental value all throughout the game. It's an additional threat, so that you're not just relying on your Gearhulks to win. It lets you turn the corner a lot faster. It's very good with Evolving Wilds, which we brought back. That's the combo that was so good in the last standard, but hasn't really seen a lot of play in this format for whatever reason. Mostly, I think, my reasoning for why this card could be well positioned right now is that the format's slowing down quite a bit. We're seeing more of a mid-range control fight like you normally see in standard. So this card, that's the kind of format where this card starts to shine again. So seeing if we can make a comeback today. We've also got Sylvan Advocate as a 3-of. It works really well with the man lands, and it's just a good cheap threat. You can, once you get up to turn 6, you can just play it for cheap and hold up counter backup. And it just, again, lets you turn the corner really quickly, pressure planeswalkers, take over games quickly while you might be at a low life total. And it's fine early just to trade off for a creature or whatever. A 2-3 isn't the best body in this format because of cards like Smuggler's Copter and Toolcraft Exemplar, that kind of thing, which is why this card hasn't seen a ton of play, but it's really nice to have later in the game, and it's like a passable play early. The counter suite, Void Shatter we saw in the Pro Tour decks. Also trying out one Spell Shrivel, just because it's less mana intensive. Does the same thing, but is a little more dead in the late game, but it's easier to cast. And the reasoning is that, late in the game, once they might be able to pay for Spell Shrivel, is where you've presumably already taken over the game because you've got extra threats to close out games faster and make it so they don't have time to play around Spell Shrivel. We're trying out Grapple with the Past today. We're playing a full 3 copies, which I'm fully aware might be too many, given that we only have 9 creatures, but it does a couple of actually very good things for us. The most obvious being that it works really well with Torrential Gearhulk. It digs us through our deck in search of a Gearhulk and puts it in our hand. It, meanwhile, fills our graveyard with more options for the Gearhulk to flash back. And then in the very late game, it just lets you loop Gearhulks together, basically, so you can never lose an attrition fight. Obviously, it's good to get back a Tireless Tracker and Advocate, because those tend to die more frequently. Then post-board, when we bring in extra threats, it does some nice things as well, but we'll get to that. It also has a really nice interaction with Galvanic Bombardment, because if you mill a Bombardment with the Grapple, it makes all the other ones in your hand do more damage, because generally you want this card to do 3 damage or more to really get full value out of it. Just as a shock, it can be kind of mediocre. Harness Lightning's the best removal spell available to us. It's the closest thing to a Terminate we're going to get in these colors, but if you can build up energy, you can take down almost anything with it. We've got a couple Radiant Flames as our last red removal spell. Just a good way to stay ahead early, keep the board clear. We're trying out one Appetite for the Unnatural in the main deck. This card has been very, very impressive for me in testing. Every deck has some sort of artifacts in it. Even the control decks have like Torrential Gearhulk, which you don't mind killing. And just hitting their Fleetwheel Cruisers and Metalwork Colossus and Aetherworks Marvel, Smuggler's Copter. This card does a lot of good things, and we even have another one in the sideboard because it's just so good. And incidental life gain is just really good in general for a control deck, so I'm pretty happy with 1 in the main. I've even considered going up to 2, but I think that might be a little too narrow. Negate is also worth talking about. It's not a card we see in the main deck very often of these control decks, but the cards that you struggle with more often are not really the creatures, which you can deal with pretty well, but it's the, planeswalkers, Aetherworks Marvels, vehicles. Like, pretty much every deck has a good target for this. Even a Declaration in Stone or whatever, because we're playing more creatures. Just being able to protect our threats, especially post-board, this card gets better, but in the main deck it does enough that it's worth the inclusion. We're also trying out 1 Nissa Vital Force, which is a card that got a lot of hype in the preseason, but really hasn't seen any play yet. But I think this is a good shell for her. We're a little bit more threat dense, so her minus actually does good things. Just lets you buy back Gearhulks, buy back Tireless Trackers, Advocates, or whatever. Her plus, the fact that she makes a 5/5 with haste, is really important against Planeswalkers, because we don't really have many good answers to Planeswalkers in these colors. Black had access to the Slaughter, Ruinous Path. White had access to, like, Quarantine Field and whatnot. Even Gideon to pressure Planeswalkers, so we need some way to deal with them, and she's a really good way. And she also just closes out games very quickly on her own. And her ultimate, goes off early, and it does good things as well, with, like, Evolving Wilds. Anyway, she's been pretty decent for me so far. So I guess moving to the sideboard, got a couple more counter spells. Let's blow this up a little bit more. A couple more counter spells just for, whatever you need to worry about. Trim down on Ceremonious Rejection, because I think Aetherworks Marvel decks are not very well positioned anymore. Might even cut them completely, depending on how the format shakes out, but there's still some decks where this is really good against it. Weaver of Lightning, very good against the aggro decks. Blocks Smuggler's Copters, combos well with all your cheap spells. There are some matchups where Tireless Tracker is not very good, so Weaver of Lightning is just a fine replacement for it in those matchups. Another Radiant Flames for the aggro matchups, of course. We're trying out 1 Impetuous Devils. As I said, we don't have many good answers to Planeswalkers, and this happens to be a pretty decent one. If your opponent plays a Gideon and makes a Knight ally, you can play this, make it so their Knight has to block, and then trample Gideon for 4. So that's one of the few clean answers to a Gideon. It also hits Chandras out of some deck sideboards, or a Jace. It has enough power that it can take down a Jace even if it pluses, so it can do some nice things. Liliana Ultimate can also be a problem out of the green-black decks, so that's another reason we might want it. It also combos pretty nicely with Grapple with the Past. You can play it, take down a Planeswalker, and then later in the game get it back with Grapple and kill another Planeswalker, and that's, the fact that this card doesn't see much play means that you can really catch some people off guard, so I'm interested to see if it can perform today. 1 Goblin Dark Dwellers is a card that none of the other blue-red control decks are playing, because it does not combo well with counter spells at all, which is why Gearhulk's so much better. But in the matchups where you're bringing in more proactive removal, like we've got the Appetite, we've got all the red burn spells, sometimes you just want another good, efficient way to overcome an early start. He can be a good addition, and he's just an extra threat against slower control decks, and you can just you flashback your grapples or whatever, or I guess you can't flashback Glimmer, but you get the picture. And then Bristling Hydra is another new addition that we're trying out. It's a very efficient threat, just like a 4 to 5 power hexproof threat in the control matchup. Another good way to pressure Planeswalkers. And in the control mirrors, people are generally cutting their Fumigates and their Harness Lightnings and all the cards that are usually good against this, so it's another way to catch people off guard and catch people with their pants down and try to kill them fast. Ishkanah we're trying out. I'm still not sure how I feel about Ishkanah, because we don't have access to very much Delirium enablers. Pretty much all of our spells are instants, with the exception of the 2 Radiant Flames. Other than that, we've got Creature, We can get lands in the yard with like Evolving Wilds and milling them. Torrential Gear Hulk is an artifact, so sometimes that comes up, and Nissa is our one planeswalker, so I'm not sure if we'll be able to get Delirium as quickly enough for this to be worth it, but in theory, the blue-white flash flyer decks have been doing well lately, and this is one of the best cards against them if you can achieve Delirium. And even if not, it's just like a efficient body. And sometimes we can make black with Aether Hub, so you never know. Then, as I said, we've got the one other Appetite, which is really good in some matchups, and a Plummet for that blue-white matchup I was talking about, because that's been popular online and in paper lately. But yeah, that's the deck. I guess I'll talk about the mana base quickly. Lumbering Falls is another big draw to green. It's just a hexproof threat that can't be killed. Pressures walkers, pressures life total, gets really big with Advocate. Wandering Ephemeral as well. Obviously this card did well at the Pro Tour, and it does similar things here, but I think is a little worse than Lumbering Falls, so I went with the 3-2 split. Evolving Wilds, you don't want too many tap lands, but it's so good with Tireless Tracker that we have to play some number of them. Then we've got the fast lands, a mix of basics, one Cinderglade, pretty self-explanatory, but yep, that's the gist of the deck. We're going to see if it's worth it to play green over any of the other options, and we'll be back for the first round.